So welcome to Helena Nicklin, also known as the Winebird. Jamie Good, who we've met a number of times from the Wine Anorak, and Rob McIntosh from Thirst for Wine. So what we're wanting to do today is look at a few wines, a couple of them out of the 2014 vintage, looking at Blancs, 2 Sauvignon Gris, and also Pinot Noir from the Awatere Valley. As a bit of background, I've been with Brancott Estate now for coming up 25 years. So Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc's been going for 35, so I've seen a fair chunk of, I guess, the history of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, and it's been a very exciting phase in the industry, and great to have been part of that. Just a bit of background. Brancott Estate, formerly known as Montana, planted the first commercial vineyards in Marlborough back in 1973. And at that stage, what we've seen as being sort of too far south and too cool, and you'd never grow grapes there. But I guess we proved to sort of challenge that, and I guess the rest is history. It was really the Sauvignon Blanc we first planted in '75 that went on to become sort of world famous. Really delivering a wine style that I guess the world hadn't seen before. The first one of the Sauvignon Blanc we made was 1979, and it was really that move to Marlborough that I guess defined the real start of the boom in the New Zealand wine industry, and the UK was really the first country we started exporting wine to. I guess to this day we continue to explore different parts of Marlborough, and some of this tasting will reflect sub-regions of Marlborough. So I think that's quite exciting. The style of Sauvignon Blanc continues to evolve. So I've been based in Marlborough now for the last 20 years. I spent the first 4 years or so up in Auckland. Seen sort of quite different parts of the business as well. And I'm a horticulturist at heart. I studied horticulture at university, so I've got a love of the land, and to me, to be a good winemaker, it is actually understanding the land. Your point of difference globally is about the land. Winemaking as an art, I guess there's a lot of knowledge skilled around the globe. So I very much go back to the land as inspiration for what we do as well. I guess if we put the first glass of wine, in the first glass we have the Sauvignon Blanc 2014, and as a bit of background first, 2014 to me was a fantastic vintage in the end. We ended up on the after 2013, which I think was possibly one of the best vintages I've ever seen in Marlborough. I guess 2014 we were wondering whether we could match the same quality again. And the 2014 started off quite warm, so it was a warm flowering and birth. And but then after Christmas, the season cooled down quite significantly. So what was looking like a vintage being 2 to 3 weeks early actually tracked in the end about the same as the long-term average. And we ended up with very late season rain. It affected the very tail end vintage, but the reality is virtually everything was harvested by that stage, and we're certainly very proud, very happy with the 2014 wines. So if we look at the first wine, the Brancott Estate Classic Blanc 2014. And I guess what we're looking for with this wine is it's a reflection of all of Marlborough. So there's fruit from both the Wairau and the Awatere valleys. And from different parts of Marlborough, you range in fruit spectrum with Sauvignon Blanc, from some of the more tropical notes, grapefruit and fruit, through to, with the Awatere Valley, some of the more herbal characters. And I think in this wine, it sort of combines all those characters. So very much what I see as being a Marlborough expression.
I think that for the purposes of this tasting, people probably don't want to see us using our spittoons, and since it is sort of dinner time over here, at least we can do a proper tasting, you spit backwards.
Absolutely.
I'll understand. That's fine. It's just after breakfast time here, so probably.
Patrick, can I ask a question about this wine?
Certainly.
So, has your classic Marlborough Sauvignon always been made sort of to recipe, as it were, for want of a better word? This is the flavour profile that you're always trying to find.
Yes, it is. The style has evolved, I guess, significantly over the years, and as we sort of understand more about viticultural practices, frankly, as our vineyard resources expanded as well. So in the early days, Brancott Vineyard, southern side of the Wairau Valley, was really the fruit resource for this, and I guess as we put plantings on the other side over in Rapara, and then later in the Awatere Valley, and the Awatere Valley plantings didn't come on stream till about 2003. So I think there's a fresh, and the second one will be an example of this as well, the character that the Awatere gives. So I think the style has evolved, but it's always a style which is not, we don't want it to be overtly ripe. I think we want some fresh sort of nettly notes as well, but it's marrying that with some of the, I guess, the more tropical grapefruit and passion fruit characters. And just looking for a really nice fresh acidity on the finish as well. So we've done an enormous amount of research into particularly the aroma of Sauvignon Blanc. So there's a reason in Marlborough world stage, and it's based around these aroma compounds called thiols. And so for many years now, we've been actually analysing those compounds. They're naturally occurring in the grape, and it's how you actually it's your viticultural practices, how you harvest the fruit. Your pressing, your juice handling, your fermentation, they all have a really big impact on how much of that thiol character actually comes through in the final wine. So the precursors are there in the juice, but it's the way you handle the grapes which will determine the expression ultimately of that wine. And it's not that we're looking for a maximum amount of those thiol aroma compounds in every wine we make. We're actually using that knowledge as a tool to differentiate wine styles we're making.
If I may interject,
so I think,
oh, sorry.
Sorry, Robert.
I was just going to say, I mean, you talk about the thiols. We've got someone on the line who's much more qualified than I am to comment on that aspect. But I do. There's something about New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc that. Basically, it's the first variety I remember. I started drinking quite a few years ago, and it was about the time when the UK market was changing a lot into varietal labelled wines and so on. And even though we recognised names, we couldn't necessarily associate them with places. And it wasn't until we had New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc together that pretty much any consumer could recognize that smell and do a blind tasting and identify this product. So to me, it's always been the classic tool for the consumer to say, here's how you identify, to smell this, you know what this is, and you will find this again. Now you can start your journey of recognizing other varieties around the world. So it is a sort of benchmark for wines around the world.
Yeah, it's nice to give the consumer that confidence, isn't it? It's the wines are that distinctive though, and it's yeah, I think that's what makes them pretty special. When we talk about those thiol aroma compounds, and we sort of measure them with in terms of a relative scale. Yeah, we measure these compounds in nanograms per molar litre. We end up with amounts 22,000 nanograms per molar litre. If you look at wines from France, for example, Sauvignon Blanc, they might be in the order of 100 or 150 nanograms per molar litre. So it's an enormous scale difference, and it's why Sauvignon Blanc is so distinctive.
So if we could take a time machine, do you hear me? If we could take
a bit broken up. Yeah, didn't catch that, Jamie.
Okay. If we could go back 80, tasting the 1979, how different would it be to?
Yeah, sorry, Jamie, I missed most of that. Did anyone else catch that?
I think I did, and I think I was actually going to ask a similar question, if I'm not mistaken. I think Jamie could probably type his notes in, and maybe one of our others could ask his questions for him. It's actually, I think what you're saying is how is maybe that measure changed if you could take a wine from, I think the question was from 1979 or the early days and today. Has that measurably changed in your wines?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, going back, when we first started analysing these wines, we were getting amounts of around 1,500 to 2,500 nanograms per milliliter. And the classic, actually, this particular wine we're tasting here is sitting at, it's about 16,000. So it's 7 or 8 fold. So it's a big shift. And I'll talk about stylistic consistency, but yes, there is style evolution, and I think there's a bit more focus on these style aroma compounds. At the same time, there's behind it, there's still those quite nutty, fresh notes as well.
Yeah, I must say that in general, there's I think I call it the name of the films just escaped me. Spinal Tap. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie, the documentary about it. It's a documentary about a pop group, and one of the guitarists has his amp, and he can turn it up to 11. And the whole conversation about turning amps up to 11 instead of 10. It does feel like sometimes this is ramped up to the maximum. Actually, I'm not finding quite so much in this, but it's a stylistic thing that people seem to be going for more and more of that aromatic profile on Sauvignon Blanc. And maybe we haven't got to the terroir series, whether that might be a bit different, a different approach.
Yeah, the terroir series is a different approach, and I think, as mentioned before, we use these tools for not maximising the levels, but creating stylistic differentiation across our range. If you end up with too much of those compounds, it ends up perhaps almost cloying with too much. And in the end, people enjoy drinking wines with food as well, so you want them to pair well with food. And so, yeah, we're wanting to preserve structure and mouthfeel and freshness on the finish. Those are very important characteristics. The other point to note is those styled aromas, they aren't the most age-worthy compounds, and they will convert to other compounds over time. And so the wines will change in character, and it's not altogether a bad thing. Some people have preference for Sauvignon Blancs with a little bit of age on them as well, but there's styles we make which are more age-worthy.
Does putting them in screw cap change that though? I mean, I'm sure it does. But have you? How long have you been using the screw cap, and have you looked at the effect it has on the aging character of even your entry-level Sauvignon?
Yeah, so the screw caps we've been using since about 2003, so about 11, 12 years. And there's no doubt that screw caps is fresher. The wines stay in a slightly more reductive state, and those style aroma compounds are very much tied up with as being complex sulfide compounds. And so there's a correlation between reductive winemaking and reductive storing of the wine under screw cap and those style aromas. So we think it's a very good having gone to screw cap for Sauvignon Blanc in particular.
Just asking a question on screw caps, just for maybe people who don't know so much about them. You have two different kinds here. Is that really just a stylistic difference, or is there any other kind of difference that will actually affect the wine in the bottles?
Yeah, there's no difference effect on the wine. Both of them are, they act as a perfect seal, but it's more cosmetic, and it's the Stelvin Lux cap has smooth outside finish, and essentially the thread is internal, whereas the other caps are spun on, so you actually see the thread. One thing we are playing around with and putting lots of trials down on is screw caps with different oxygen transfer rates. So rather than being in a totally reductive state, for some wine styles, having some ability to breathe can be a good thing as well. So we're looking at those trials. But it's perhaps more significant for more structured reds, maybe Bordeaux-style reds.
I'd really like to see the results of those kind of competitions, well, those kind of tests. Are they? Is anyone using those on a regular basis? These?
Yep.
Or is it all very much trial stage?
It's still relatively early days, but people are moving to those for certain wine styles. I don't. Jury's out, but I'm not sure that's appropriate for Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc yet.
Jamie was asking, are these? You were talking about the Amcor liners.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So it's as I said, we're interested in always exploring new new technologies, and always try to be at the forefront of those things as well. So.
Well, it's after screw cap then.
Not sure. All right. So, any comments on that first wine? Did you like it? Are you familiar with previous vintages of that particular wine?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really almost if we taste the second wine, it might be easier to draw the differences between them both as well. I think.
Right. Let's go on and do that. So the second wine is the Brancott Estate Terroir series, and this fruit is specifically from the Awatere Valley. This is the 2013 vintage, so we've just typed the 14 under the classic. So 2013, as I mentioned before, it was an outstanding vintage, and people saw it as being a hot vintage. In fact, it wasn't. If you look at the growing degree days across the season, it stayed right on the long-term average, but the significant thing was it was an incredibly dry season. It was sunny and it was dry, and so total control over water to the vine through irrigation. And to me, all the harvest decisions were based on flavour.
It seems to me to be a lot more concentrated and a little bit more acidity, much more structured. Now, and is that just a combination partly of the area? You said it was much more, the wine said to be more herbal from this part of the world. Partly the vintage, or partly the winemaking? Which is the most important thing that makes a difference in this one?
It's really to do with the vineyard location. So this is the Awatere Valley, so it's to the south of the main Wairau Valley, and this valley is cooler and quite a bit drier. So the annual rainfall is 550 millimetres down towards the coast. So across in the Wairau Valley, it's closer to 700 or 800 millimetres of rain a year, so significantly drier. The vineyards we have are right down near the coast, so next to Cook Strait, a windy place, and we often get a northeast wind coming in off Cook Strait. The northeast wind is much cooler than the northwest winds you see in the Wairau Valley, and interestingly, the winters are very frost-free, and it's proximity to the coast. So what happens? You get a very early bud burst in the Awatere Valley, and historically this land was used for farming. So the first lambs coming out of the South Island were from Seaview in the Awatere Valley. The first peas, so it's very early country because it is frost-free. And so out of the whole of Marlborough, probably the first place for bud burst, but then it's the last place for actually harvesting. And what that gives you is this intensity of flavour, this hang time, which builds intensity of flavour into the wines. And certainly a more herbal spectrum. I often talk about sort of walking into a glass house full of tomatoes. It's that sort of quite heady, neatly sort of fresh herbal note. I call it a ripe green character.
Yeah, actually, at first it kicks off with a bit more tropical fruit, but then that, as you say, that sort of green tomato and leafy, nettly character really kicks in and quite long on that, and it's that acidity as well, which lingers.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. acidity in terms of actual numbers would be quite similar to the first wine. But the acid makeup would be a little different, I think. So because it's hung out for longer, the malic acid is sort of basically been degraded, and so it's actually got naturally higher tartaric acid levels, and so it's quite a fresh, juicy acidity to the wine.
It's interesting what Rob was saying about the first wine, your classic Brancott Estate. That's a great place for beginners to start learning about grape varieties and how you can learn how to distinguish them. So would you say comparing these two would be a brilliant next step for learning the difference, well, what terroir means, basically? If you want,
yeah, I believe so. It's, to me, it's a classic sort of sub-regional expression. It's sort of focusing in onto a parcel of land in the Awatere Valley, which delivers a character that you don't see in the Wairau Valley. Wairau Valley is only 20-minute drive away, very, very close, just over the hill. But the characters are so different from the climate, soil types. They're a bit different as well, but I think the biggest driver is really that climatic change.
I'm sharing a note from Jamie. I'll be his spokesperson here because it seems his audio doesn't seem to get through. But he's saying, I like this. It's very different to the first wine, but there's a greenness here that's integrated and seems to work well. I don't know. Maybe is that a vintage thing, or is this sorry? It's related to the other question. But is there an integration which is just the fact that it's a year older as well?
It's partly, and obviously Sauvignon Blanc does change in the bottle over the course of a year. But I think inherently this wine would look at perhaps a little more tropical on the nose in that first year, with some of those thiol compounds coming through. But those sort of dissipate in the bottle, and what we're left with is, I think, sort of still it's a classic expression of Awatere Valley. It's very select fruit. We're going through, and we've got sizable plantings in the Awatere Valley, but we'll go through and we know which blocks deliver, I guess, more concentration of flavour as well. So the blocks going into this majority are pruned to 2 canes, crop managed to relatively low crop levels, and I think just give this nice richness to the wine.
Now, I don't have the prices in front of me, but obviously the second one is going to be more expensive. The price is about £2 more. I think this one's $12.39 in the UK, compared with $10.49 for the classic.
And do they both go to the same markets, or is there a market that prefers one style over another, like the US or Germany or whatever?
Yeah, it's a good question. This one we're trying here, the Terroir series, has actually been specifically launched in the UK market, and over the years we've seen I think a tendency for the UK consumer, this preference for a slightly more herbal spectrum. And if you compare that with the US market, I think that it's more it's a riper, more tropical, slightly sweeter palate, if you like. But we've always seen a real preference in the UK for some of these Awatere Valley characters coming through. The Awatere is quite windswept as well, so what I think the vines have to struggle a little bit harder in the Awatere, and the bunches are, the grapes tend to be a little bit smaller, and I think that increases that sort of skin to juice ratio, and I think almost sort of builds the extract into the wine, and I think it gives you actually more mouthfeel, more texture to the wines as well.
So if the second wine was your glass house with tomatoes in it, fine tomatoes on it, the first wine would be a bowl of tropical fruit? I don't know, what would you say?
Yeah, it could be. We certainly make wines which are more tropical again than the classic. For this one, yeah, I think it's just it really is an assortment of fruit. It's everything from stone fruit through to, actually you do have some of those more citrus characters. So there's a whole gamut of flavours going on there.
Fruit salad.
But yeah, a fruit bowl. It sounds good.
Fabulous.
Okay, Okay, shall we move on to the third wine? And so we can look now at a couple of Sauvignon Gris wines. So we've been growing Sauvignon Gris for a good part of about 10 years. Had them out in the market now for about 5 years. So Sauvignon Gris is it's not a blend. It's a standalone grape variety. Actually, an ancient Bordeaux variety, and although there's still some produced in Bordeaux, it tends to be blended into the likes of Bordeaux Blanc. So you wouldn't see it varietally labelled. There's some grown in Chile, and some good examples coming out of there. In New Zealand, I think we've captured the market. We have almost all of New Zealand's Sauvignon Gris plantings, and we think it's a fabulous variety. What I love about it is that to me, it really reflects the characters I associate with Marlborough. So it's that fresh, vibrant character you see in Sauvignon Blanc. So aromatically, it shares some of those Sauvignon Blanc characters. This slightly herbal nose, leaning through to some of the stone fruit characters. But what particularly strikes me about the Sauvignon Gris is that texturally it's a little rounder, a little softer. It's a bit broader on the palate. It's say 22, 23 Brits. We were talking about 13 Beaumet. The characters were still a little bit herbal, so we've, and particularly in this 14 vintage, we've taken it much riper. I think this one's sitting up over 14% alcohol.
Yeah, that's what I was just checking, 14.5.
Yeah, so it gives the wine real generosity. It's almost got a sweetness from the palate. But to me, it took it into a flavour spectrum, which I was happy as well, and it sort of puts it more to those stone fruit characters.
A question from Jamie: Are your
yields? Any comments on that wine?
Yes, sorry. Jamie's asking: are the yields lower for the Gris?
They're actually similar to Sauvignon Blanc, perhaps a little bit lower. If you look historically, when Sauvignon Gris was grown in Bordeaux, when phylloxera came through Bordeaux, they took Sauvignon Gris out and actually replanted with Sauvignon Blanc because it was a more reliable cropper. The reality is in Marlborough, it's a reliable cropper. We actually see very good results with Sauvignon Gris. Harvested at a similar time of the year to Sauvignon Blanc, sort of within a week or so of Sauvignon Blanc. On the vine, it looks very different. It's a rose colour. It's a pinky colour on the actual grape itself. Looks more similar to Pinot Gris on the vine. And we're also finding the skin's a little bit thicker than Sauvignon Blanc, so it's a little more resistant to botrytis. And but really, it's a fabulous variety to deal with.
I'm definitely finding more roundness on the palate. That fruit is showing more and less of the obvious, very high grassy green character that maybe the Sauvignon Blanc has. Slightly more tropical and slightly more floral, I guess. It's slightly more sort of, there's a rose water character as well. It's sort of a pinkish, I think, slightly in terms of color, but there's sort of a pinkish color to the taste as well as obviously to the grape. Slightly synesthetic here, but maybe it's sort of it's like a lychee character, I guess, that you don't really get on the Sauvignon as much.
Yeah, those are nice descriptors, and actually probably characters we've only really seen with the 14 vintage as we've gone to taking it a little bit riper. So I'm sort of very happy with those characters, and I think it highlights the benefit. We have a cool climate viticulture. We do have the length of growing season. We have the cool nights, which deliver that vibrancy of aroma and flavour. The actual acidity on this is it's lower. It's about just over half a gram lower than Sauvignon Blanc. So I think there's a slight difference there with how it actually feels on the palate. We've left the residual sugar slightly higher, so this is sitting at about 5 or 6 grams residual sugar, whereas the Sauvignon Blancs tend to sit at 3 to 4 grams.
So it's quite a different wine. Would you drink it in a different way to a Sauvignon Blanc, for example? Would you be more likely to have this with food or less likely, etc.?
I think both are very versatile, and I think it's sort of matching up dishes. To me, food and wine matching, rather than necessarily matching specific flavours, it's more about matching intensity of flavour. And I think there's a softness about this, which, if it goes with roast chicken or those type of dishes, I think would look really, really smart.
It's an interesting question now in terms of grape varieties. Obviously, well, you helped put New Zealand on the map with Sauvignon Blanc, and now it's firmly associated with Sauvignon Blanc, and now to some extent Pinot Noir. If you were going to put your marketing effort behind another grape varietal, it seems Sauvignon Gris is not necessarily where you would automatically think someone would do that in terms of recognition. Is it just because it's something you have this unique you have control over, or is it because you think it has a particular unique character, or is it just a case of we're tasting this tonight and you've got lots of other things in your armory?
No, we're backing this one enormously. So with our plantings, Sauvignon Blanc is certainly number one. Pinot second, and actually Sauvignon Gris now third.
Oh, really?
Pinot Gris gets an enormous focus as well, but with Sauvignon Gris, we feel we've got a real point of difference against our competitors, but we think it's just so well suited to growing in Marlborough. It's just a really nice fit, and I think some people will find the acidity on Sauvignon Blanc perhaps a little bit high. I think this wine actually softens that palate out, and I think it's enormously approachable for consumers.
I mean, I know that I have to admit that I've never actually been to New Zealand, so I know Jamie's been there recently, and I don't know if Helena's been out there, but the things I associate with it as a country in terms of production, Riesling, in terms of whites, Riesling, and I was hearing stories about Gruner Veltliner as well. But Sauvignon Gris came from a left field for me in terms of another variety.
Well, it is, and I'd like to be pioneering as well. We'd like to do things a little bit differently and look for things that other producers aren't doing. But we felt it was a great fit here, and as I said, we've been growing it for over 10 years. The first few years, small trial areas, but we certainly have significant plantings now, and the UK was very much a focus for our launch with Sauvignon Gris.
So you say you have, I mean, Jamie is asking a question as well. I mean, I know you said you have most of the plantings, but is there much else, much other Sauvignon Gris in New Zealand, or are other people going to start doing it now that you've put it on the map?
I think there's increasing interest in it. I think some of the other producers in Marlborough are looking at it, and another producer actually approached us about buying some fruit recently, so obviously they're interested. But no, there's a few producers, but quite small quantities, and obviously it takes a little while to build up budwood, etc. And a couple of the nurseries do have some plant material now.
Do you have any other grape varieties in the pipeline, or will we just have to wait and see?
We're playing around. We're always looking at new opportunities. There's a parcel of land we're looking to develop in, I guess, small blocks of trial varieties as well. So historically, the inspiration has been very much varieties out of France. But we are a cool climate. We can be looking at other countries, whether it's northern Italy or Switzerland or Austria. I think there's other things which could be very successful in New Zealand.
I'll fight for the Swiss varietals. Plant Chasselas and see how that does down there. Having just returned from there.
Chasselas is something New Zealand had years ago. Had.
No comment.
Right. Okay, let's move along to the next one, which is the Letter Series R. So it's the Renwick Sauvignon Gris from 13. So this is under our Letter Series, and I guess the for the Letter Series is it's always about vineyard selection. It's looking for parcels which deliver more fruit concentration, whether it's low vigor root, I guess, making creating quite a different balance in the vine and having very naturally low crop levels and a less vigorous canopy. So it's just finding that balance and finding that perfect marriage of sort of soil and rootstock and clone. So with this one here, the fruit is off both Brancott Estate and Renwick. So it's not a single vineyard wine, but we're looking for really those clay-based soils on that southern side of the Wairau Valley, giving you more palate weight and texture. So to me, perhaps a step up in concentration from the classic. This is the 2013 vintage, had a little bit of bottle age. And this one's sitting at, from memory, 14% alcohol.
14, yes.
And it's aromatically perhaps a slightly more herbal spectrum than the classic. But I think it brings in some other characters as well. So we've used some wild fermentation. We've used some large format oak for the ferments. So fermenting in 10,000 litre cuves. And it's not to give it any obvious oak flavour at all. It's to, I guess, increase the savoury complexity about the wine.
Texturally, this is. I'll try and see if you can listen. My microphone's working now, but texturally, this is fabulous. I think it has it's almost like I hate to use the word mineral, but there's a sort of a core to this wine that's a textural core, which I think works really well.
Yeah, nice. It's I know in the winemaking team, this has been our wine of choice. If we're doing winemaker dinners and so on over the last year, we've been pouring this wine because we absolutely love it. There's a hint of reduction on the nose, but I think almost that adds to it. It's got a sort of flintiness to the nose.
And I think this wine will likely age well, that's my guess. This is something you wouldn't have to drink up quickly, because it's not just reliant on those aromatics to...
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. Because Sauvignon Gris doesn't really have thiols, and thiols are compounds which, as I said before, do age. So I think Sauvignon Gris perhaps has some very good aging potential.
Mm-hmm. What happens to it? I mean, because given that its acidity does seem to be quite a bit lower than the Sauvignon Blanc. So what happens as Sauvignon Gris gets older? Does it just become more textural and a bit more savoury rather than just all about the fruit?
I think those are exactly the things you expect. A slightly more savoury note, and you'll lose some of the fresh fruit highlights on the nose, but there's a sort of a roundness, a generosity to the wine, which I think makes it age very well. As I said, the early ones we made were perhaps a bit too herbal, so I don't know that they had the ageability. But I think now with these slightly riper styles, there's more potential there as well.
I can see why you select this for your winemaker dinners. It has quite a broad, and a big mouth. It's quite impressive. See Jamie's head bobbing up and down. It also has almost like a biscuity character. Almost, I hate to say autolytic because it's obviously not. Is there yeast contact or something on this?
There is, and it's actually quite common across our Letter Series range. We're trying to, I guess, highlight some of those textual aspects of the wine as well. And so, if we're fermenting in cuve, we would give post-ferment lees contact. And we're sitting on actually gross ferment lees for months and months post-ferment. And it keeps the wines very fresh, but it helps the wines evolve, and it helps the textual aspects of the wine as well. And so we would do some lee stirring over that time, and then ultimately we would let that settle and break. But yeah, it's done across the Letter Series B Sauvignon Blanc, across this one, and it's quite a good tool for building a bit of structure into the wines as well.
What's your food match for Sauvignon Gris Letter Series?
I often sort of look at sort of what's growing around Marlborough as inspiration. So you know, the Marlborough Sounds, we have salmon, growing salmon, and also things like green mussel. Mussels are a big export industry for Marlborough, and yeah, I think sort of fresh seafood are fabulous with these wines, very much like they are with Sauvignon Blanc as well. And I think because these are a little bit softer, maybe yeah, slightly more yeah, slightly richer foods as well. So salmon, which is I guess a bit oily in texture, I think it's a really nice fit.
I haven't had my dinner yet, so I'm getting hungry at all this conversation.
Good stuff. Okay, should we go on to the last wine, which is the Pinot Noir, and this is once again under the Terroir series, and from the Awatere Valley in Marlborough, 2013 vintage. So yeah, the comments in terms of the sub-region of the Awatere Valley, and specifically sea view on the southern side of the river where we have our plantings. We're sitting on north-facing terraces, so yeah, we have these range of terraces stepping up from the river, and they were set up essentially by floods of the river historically. So there's silt and loam sort of overlying gravels, and you go down, you know, there's 2 or 3 feet of these silts, then stones, and then underneath there's what's known as papa, and papa is essentially a mudstone which is impermeable to water. So any irrigation within the Awatere Valley, the water needs to come directly out of the river. There's no sort of subterranean water. It's you know, quite a dry place, and the water rights in the river are sort of quite tightly held and controlled by the council. But it's yeah, as I said before, it's quite a windswept place. It's a relatively harsh environment. The place we've got our Pinot Noir growing is actually tucked down underneath these quite high terraces. And what those terraces do is provide shelter from the southerly winds. So it's a little bit of a microclimate within Seaview as well. So quite sheltered and quite a relatively warm site for that area. And yeah, we have a number of clones planted. We planted these vineyards back in '99 and 2000, so that, you know, the vines are sort of 14, 15 years old now.
So Patrick,
yeah.
In a vineyard, in some of the Sauvignon vineyards, my understanding is there's quite a lot of variation within that vineyard in terms of the soils that might lead to sort of ripe and unripe flavours in the wine. Presumably with Pinot Noir, you'd like to have a vineyard that has very homogeneous soils, so you get even ripeness. Is that the case here, or do you tolerate a bit of underripeness and overripeness in Pinot as well?
No, I think it's a fair comment. We do look for even soils, particularly with Pinot Noir. Actually, the Awatere Valley and those river terraces we have there are relatively even in terms of soils. They're much more even than the likes of Ripara. And if you look at Ripara, essentially the soils in Ripara have been set up by successive floods of the Wairau River, and so and the river runs from west to east, sort of down to the coast, and your vineyard rows run north-south. So essentially your variation exists down the row, and within the Awatere Valley, the orientation of the river is the same way, but terraces are sort of higher up from the river, and we actually see more even soils. The higher terraces are certainly more, there's more loess and there's slightly richer, deeper soils. The lower terraces don't perform as well. They're a little more variable, and for this wine we certainly target the second or third terrace up from the river.
Specific. It's good.
And so, look, like I was saying with the Sauvignon Blanc, the Terroir series Sauvignon Blanc, the climate in the Awatere Valley, I think the length of the growing season builds this intensity of flavour into the wines. There's a juiciness about the acidity, and with Pinot Noir, it's not a dark spectrum. I find there's a brightness and more of a red fruit spectrum to the wine. We often talk about raspberries, and there's a vibrancy there.
Actually, there's a particular character, which comes out really strongly for me, and maybe others will disagree with me, but to me it smells very much of blood oranges. You've got that red character of the blood orange, but that citrusy element and that slightly pithy element as well. And to me, it's quite different from many other Pinot, especially New Zealand Pinot.
I haven't heard that as a description before, and actually tasting it, I agree. I think it's a very good analogy.
Good note.
With cherries dipped in it, of course, but yeah. I'm a big fan of red oranges, so you taste it and you think, I want more of that. And it's nice because it has a complexity to it, and a slight dry, that pithy character, but without it becoming too stalky or woody.
I'm a huge fan of New Zealand Pinot Noir. I've been following it for a few years, but for me the big story is how far Marlborough has come with Pinot Noir. I think that the last Pinot Noir celebration, one of the most exciting rooms, they separated the different regions into different rooms, and the Marlborough room was the one with the most thrills for me, because I wasn't expecting it to be so good.
Yeah, that was nice feedback. Obviously, all of us in Marlborough were expecting it to be that good, but anyway, I'm pleased we got the message across. But the reality is half of all of New Zealand's Pinot Noir is grown in Marlborough, and I think season to season consistency exists in Marlborough more than any other region. We do have quite a stable climate. At the same time, yes, it is cool climate. It's cool enough to really show that perfume and the beautiful characters of Pinot Noir. But without being too extreme where you can get seasonal variation, you get affected by frost, and or you run out of growing degree days at the tail end of the season. So I think you'll see a lot of the bigger Pinot Noir producers tend to be focused on Marlborough. And what I love about the Marlborough Pinot Noir style is I find them very complete on the palate. It's something about the the acidity and the tannin structure, which is quite long. So perhaps they don't have the perfume or that seductive fragrance of some of the top central Otago wines, but I think they are very complete in terms of palate structure. And it's perhaps a slightly more red fruit spectrum, but there's a brightness and freshness about the wines.
It's always good to see it coming through also at 13.5% rather than 14 or 14.5% as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the picking decisions with Pinot Noir are very much about being in the vineyard, actually tasting fruit, looking at the berries. We would love to see real seed ripeness and lignifying of the stems and the seeds turning brown. Doesn't always happens. The seeds can be still a little bit green, but I think in the Awatere, actually, we tend to get sort of darker seeds. I think the length of the growing season, because it is a bit cooler, gives you that physiological ripeness as well.
I seem to recall that there was a wine writer recently saying that people should pick earlier, so you don't have to wait for your brown seeds.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, we look at the, sort of the turgor of the berry. Actually, when the berry starts sort of collapsing a little bit, I think you're still starting to leave it a little bit late. So yeah, I like to see the canopy on the vine not falling over either. Yes, we are moving into autumn, but I don't want to see the whole canopy sort of turning yellow before you decide to pick.
And that Pinot presumably is much more expensive to make than Sauvignon Blanc, but is it much more expensive than the Sauvignon?
So this is $14.49, I believe. So yeah, £2 more than the Sauvignon Blanc. And yeah, you're right. It's significantly more expensive to make than Sauvignon Blanc. Obviously, there's the handling costs within the winery. The cropping levels in the vineyard tend to be significantly lower, and I think importantly for Pinot Noir, it's one variety which completely reflects cropping level, and it's a variety you just can't take any shortcuts with. And Sauvignon Blanc tends to be a lot less, transparent about cropping level. In fact, if you go too low with crop level on Sauvignon Blanc, I think it's actually a negative thing. So Ultimately, it's about vine balance for all varieties. Are there any other comments or questions on Pinot Noir? As I said before, it's our second biggest planted variety. Gets a lot of focus. We're producing a number of different wine styles, some which are Marlborough expressions, some right across Marlborough, but then wines like this one here, which is specifically about a sub-region. When you look at the terraces, the Letter Series T Pinot Noir, it's specifically off the southern side of the main Wairau Valley, up on the terraced hillside, and with clay-based soils driving probably a darker spectrum than this, and more a bit more structure as well.
Do you get to? I was just going to ask, you've got Pinot there. Are you planting other red varieties in that sort of area? Do you get the ripeness for?
We have a little bit of Merlot grown in Marlborough, and actually over on the northern side of the valley in sort of a warmer part. We used to have quite a bit of Cabernet and Merlot and Malbec and a lot of things planted, but the reality is Marlborough is too cool for those varieties, and so we don't have any Cabernet anymore. And Cabernet has methoxypyrazines like Sauvignon Blanc, but perhaps those herbal characters are less appropriate in Cabernet. So our Bordeaux red plantings are very much focused up in the North Island these days, in Hawke's Bay. But Marlborough is very much about Pinot Noir. And what I would, and I was talking before about doing some, looking at alternative varieties as well, and looking at other cool climate countries for inspiration. I would like to see a perhaps more robust red style, more tannin structure and so on, as an alternative to what we're doing with Pinot Noir. But it's finding that variety suited to cool climate. That's a challenge.
You're doing all right with Pinot Noir.
That's right. Focus isn't bad either. Very good. Well, if there are any more questions, happy to take those. But
that's great. Thank you very much.
I was just saying, thank you. The revelation was the Sauvignon Gris, sort of something to explore further.
It's nice to hear. Yeah, we're very excited about it, but obviously it's trying to get it out there and getting people to try it, and I think that's the key to its success is getting people to try this variety and the expression we get out of Marlborough. Okay, well, if there's no questions, been fabulous hanging out with you, and nice to see the technology in the main part worked. Appreciate you taking the time to try the wines.
Thank you very much for your time and your expertise and your wines.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you.
Yes.
Cheers.